What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on another sunny day in a rather quiet city of Westminster as once again we make sure that we have a variety of distinct perspectives on leadership and current affairs, and in today's episode, an in-depth look at that inner power within each and every one of us. I'm Scott Challinor and I'm delighted to be joined on the air today by Joanna Brett, the CEO and owner of Starjumpz Children's Centre. Starjumpz is an independent assessment, treatment and support service for children and young people, which helps young people with conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, sensory processing difficulties, developmental trauma and mental health conditions. The centre was founded 30 years ago by occupational therapist Jill Christmas, with Joanna Brett, also an occupational therapist, taking over in 2011. Joanna has since expanded the centre to offer a wide range of integrated and holistic services, pioneering approaches and support for parents, teachers and healthcare professionals. Dr. Georgie Siggers, a leading consultant paediatrician, joined Joanna and the team in 2013, and she has been integral to the development of the diagnostic services and to the post-adoption support that Starjumpz offers. Starjumpz itself is located in a bespoke centre set in beautiful countryside in Crowborough, East Sussex, and helps thousands every year, both locally, UK-wide and internationally. Joanna and her team are passionate about taking a proactive early intervention approach which addresses the often complex needs of the children they support and which helps to protect against the development of secondary mental health conditions. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present Joanna Brett. Jo, very warm welcome to you and many thanks for joining us on the programme today.
Thank you, Scott. It's lovely to have this opportunity to speak to you.
It's an absolute pleasure having you on the air. Now, Jo, you're of course a children's centre that provides a multitude of services for children and young people with neurodevelopmental conditions. I understand the centre sees around about 2,000 children per year, I believe I'm correct in saying that, and employs also around 15 people with 25 associates as well. So tell me, with everything going on at the moment with the whole COVID-19 situation, how has it been for you in your line of work navigating the last few weeks? Because I can imagine the challenges have been quite immense.
Yes, they have indeed. As so many other organisations have had to do, we had to lock down and stop seeing our children and families face to face. So within about 2 weeks, we have very quickly adapted to providing services with video link communications such as Zoom. And, for some of the team members, it's been easier than others. But for all of us, it's been a big change. And also as a very close-knit team, I think we've all found it quite hard not seeing each other in person. We're obviously having meetings with Zoom calls to catch up and using technology to work on things together from a distance, but it's had a very big impact on us as a team.
And as well as, of course, yes.
The way we work.
No, carry on, Jo.
Oh, sorry. And on the way that we can provide support. I think a lot of our families initially were feeling, as we were as well, quite overwhelmed with the change in our day-to-day lives. And so for some of them, they've taken a little bit of time before they've been ready to perhaps try some video link communication appointments or assessments. But now we're starting to see people embracing that support.
It's really positive to see that the support is going down really well. And how have you found the transition to remote working? Because I understand for some businesses and some organisations it's been quite a seamless transition, but for others it's been a little bit more of a monumental challenge, almost like taking Rome down and having to rebuild it in a day, as it were.
Well, fortunately, we have been using technology quite a lot within our work, and we have been doing broadcasts and live webinars. And so we're used to using technology to a certain extent, but for example, diagnostic assessments, we've had to really work as a team to research how other organisations who've been doing online assessments for a long time have been doing them, and see how we can adapt what we do to that kind of format. For example, our paediatrician has now developed a 3-stage assessment process where the first stage is a video-linked consultation. Following that, if the family and our paediatrician, Dr. Georgie Siggers, feels it's appropriate to proceed to doing some online video-linked assessment, there'll be a second stage where the second stage of the assessment with some standardised tests are done through that communication, and then a third stage, which will be the face-to-face final part of the assessment when we can be face-to-face. So we've had to put in a lot of work to adapting how we deliver that kind of a service. Some of the other talking therapies we offer, for example, psychological support from clinical psychology, that's been quite easy to do with online appointments. The occupational therapy has been a little bit more challenging, and we have had sessions starting now where we're doing shorter sessions with children, but they're actually really enjoying engaging with therapists. And the speech and language therapy has been very quick to go online. And Liz Van Gran, one of our, which is our leading speech and language therapist, she is being very creative with how she's using Zoom. For example, she's got wonderful virtual backgrounds where she's got dinosaurs behind her, you know, that look like they're chasing each other, and she's getting lovely interaction with the children, and then maybe switching to other pictures behind her where she's got objects. And it's, you know, it's a different way of working, but it can be very effective.
It certainly can. And would you say that working in this way has benefited you so far?
Well, I would say that we're not having the usual amount of sessions or contact that we would have had face-to-face, but we've always been looking to develop our online resources and support. And so that's been very positive, because it's very much fast-forwarding us to do that for the future. And we do have quite a lot of children who come from abroad to visit us here. So it is pushing us forward in developing what we do to be able to be accessed by people much further afield, which is a benefit.
Absolutely. And is it perhaps possible to embrace these solutions to perhaps satisfy the need for more private assessments, especially at this sort of time?
Yes. So we are able to offer private assessments. And I think the feeling amongst our team is that we for many of the private assessments would still want to have a final face-to-face appointment. But in our research, we're finding that there are other companies, especially in America, who've been doing online work for, over 10 years. So we are looking into that and seeing whether we can possibly develop some of the assessments so that they could be all online and not require face-to-face.
That's really interesting, because I can imagine that with everything going on, the strain on the NHS is probably as big as it ever has been. And so your personal approach at Starjumpz, it differs from the conventional way of doing things, doesn't it, if I understand correctly?
Yes, you're right. And just to comment on your point about the strain on the NHS, we know that a lot of children who come to us have been waiting more than 2 years to have a diagnostic assessment, for example, for autism or ADHD. And we've taken on contracts from the NHS to help them with their waiting lists in the past. Obviously, with this period of lockdown right now, those waiting lists are going to be increasing, and those families are going to be not having any support. So, we feel quite concerned about when we do when we are able to open up again, that there will be a greater demand on the NHS and perhaps on us. And so being able to offer online is something that is available to families. Then the other part of your question about how we are perhaps slightly different from a conventional approach, if I just sort of outline how we are different and then talk about it in relation to waiting lists and how the NHS works with assessments in many cases. So with Starjumpz, we're very much a health-orientated approach that we adopt, whereas often with conventional medicine and the conventional approaches, they may be more disease-orientated, so looking at a diagnosis or a system or one particular issue. We have specialists in lots of different fields in medicine, and we are very dedicated to having a holistic and bespoke kind of approach rather than set pathways. In the NHS, for example, many authorities have single pathways for assessment. So, for example, if your child is thought to have autism, they will be put on the autism pathway for assessment. And the kinds of children that we see, and every child is likely to have overlapping conditions or overlapping strengths and difficulties. And if you're only looking at one single diagnosis, you're not then able to pick up if they may also have symptoms of ADHD, for example, or sensory processing and coordination difficulties. So by offering holistic and integrated assessments, we're able to look at the whole child in relation to their family and to difficulties they may have had with their health over time, and look at how they're functioning in school and how the whole picture weaves together so that we can make sure any help we provide is going to address all those different difficulties that they have and build on their strengths. So the conventional approach tends to be very diagnostic-centred, as I said, and we like to be very child-person-centred. The conventional approach tends to address symptoms, whereas we really like to look at root causes and underlying reasons why a child may be presenting with different difficulties, behaviours, and challenges. And we also consider biochemical individuality, and often conventional medicine will ignore the nutritional kind of biochemical individuality of the children that they might see. And part of that is because in medical training, doctors may only get one lecture on nutrition, which when we consider that the founder of modern medicine said, let thy medicine be thy food and thy food be thy medicine, we've sort of veered away from that core foundation for healing and looking after our health. And we believe very strongly in a preventative approach, whereas often conventional medicine has to take a reactive approach, and some of that is as a result of limited resources and limited funding. And I do respect that the NHS really tries to be as preventative as possible, but often they're limited in what they can do. And I think it would be great to see change in that way.
And do you think that going forward, there's certainly a place for functional medicine solutions as well?
Yes, so functional medicine is really big in America, for example, and it really just is a way of looking at nutrition and lifestyle, and the whole combination of our genetics and our biological functioning to improve long-term health. And it's a really good way of creating change in the health of the child and the family. So I don't know if you know the term epigenetics. It's a whole new, it's becoming more and more recognised as a way of being able to change the expression of your genetic code. So, for example, with good, healthy eating, with making sure you don't have nutritional deficiencies, and with good lifestyle where you're getting exercise and good sleep and doing activities that can help you feel calm and well, you can actually change how your genes might be expressed if you didn't follow those better ways of looking after your body and your mind. So we're very excited recently to have Dr. Liz Corcoran join the team. She was originally working as a psychiatrist, and she has changed to take a functional medicine approach to helping people with their health. And she's working with our team, with our clinical nutritionists, with our paediatricians, occupational therapists, and the whole team to help support people to address different difficulties they might be having with their health, but also things like behaviour can be very much affected by what we're putting into our bodies and how we're looking after ourselves. And she will look at the timeline of a child's life, or if it's working with adolescents or adults as well, what has happened during their lives that may have impacted their health. For example, trauma can cause a real physical reactions in the body that can affect development and stress levels and development of diseases and mental health conditions. So we're really excited about being able to offer this approach because it really helps to protect the long-term health and really to promote optimal functioning. Myself personally, I came across this approach just through personal experience when I was in America a long time ago, and it really changed my life and has made me very passionate about how it can change other people's lives.
And it certainly seems now it's a good time to take stock and really focus on that particular approach to create change within the family environment specifically. What's also coming to the fore at the moment during this pandemic as well, Joe, is that as well as, of course, physical health and avoiding contracting COVID-19, there's a renewed emphasis on mental health as well, especially with the impact of the UK lockdown, having certain freedoms restricted, having to remain at home, and really supporting mental health is another issue of huge importance right now.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think we're all feeling a bit kind of overwhelmed with what's happening. We're all of us in a very changed environment and have a lot of things going on to often be very worried about. And children, of course, are going to be picking all of this up, and we know they are. And it's going to have be affecting all of our mental health. Our Dr. Liz did a Facebook Live last week to talk about supporting health during this period in particular, and she touched on the fact that a lot of people are going through a grief process, and that this huge change in our circumstances is actually triggering in a lot of people past traumas, and that they're going through a kind of grief process. So we are very concerned for our children and families who are at home trying to homeschool children, trying to work, trying to manage their finances and all sorts of other stresses, who are quite isolated. And fortunately, there's a lot of stuff which is coming out online and a lot of support online, which we're also trying to contribute, which is free for people to access to support those people, but not to support those, to support everyone. And yes, mental health is a really big concern right now, and it's very worrying to think about how the impact of the lockdown might be affecting the people who are really struggling. We see a lot of young people who come to us who are self-harming and suicidal, who haven't been able to get help through the NHS. and are on waiting lists. And it's very worrying to think about those children right now, those children and young people who are struggling.
And I think technology, again, certainly has a role to play here in keeping us connected and having a knock-on effect on mental health as a result of keeping connected and making sure that that support network is there.
Yes, it does. We found that a lot of families and children have engaged really well with video link communication, but some of them actually find it stressful and haven't wanted to engage, although talking to Dr. Georgie Siggers the other day, she said that some young people were coming onto a Zoom call and were starting off with their video switched off and just watching what was going on, and then became more comfortable and actually would then switch on their video. And she said that it has really added to her assessment in many ways, because she's seen children and young people at home in their own environments where they felt quite comfortable, and so that there have been, some positive benefits, and given her new insights into the cases that she might be working with by seeing them in the home environment.
I think it's a case of adaptability, isn't it? And just understanding the people who are linking in and being able to essentially cater for their needs more than anything.
Absolutely. We, like everyone, we're trying to be as flexible and as adaptable to people's individual needs. So if somebody just wants a very brief appointment, consultation or chat, we can do that and build it up, or just do, as and when people need the support. Just one thing I wanted to say in support of mental health during this time is that the functional medicine, sort of nutrition and lifestyle approach, it's a great time right now for families with young people who've got difficulties to be really thinking about exploring this, because your children are not going to school. You're at home. You can really see what they're eating all throughout the day. The whole family can support whatever changes might need to occur to promote their health and well-being and their mental health. Whereas in normal times, a child would be going to school, and sometimes it's very difficult to support changes when a child's not at home the whole time. And we often will say to families, holiday times are a really good time to try and make change like this. And we do offer, Dr. Liz does offer a free 15-minute phone call to explore whether a family might consider that this would help them. So we are offering that, and we're really trying to encourage people to look at their health and well-being, mental health and physical health at this time, and to access what online support there is. And we've got a number of Facebook Lives. Next week we're doing one on anxiety. Liz is going to be talking about anxiety from a functional medicine approach, which I think will be very helpful.
That does certainly seem incredibly interesting, and I think you are right when you say that it is a time to really consider things and take stock. And I think that is particularly relevant in the education sector and how it caters for the needs of children with neurodiversity and additional needs. First and foremost, it is quite a challenge securing education and healthcare plans which support additional needs in school in the first place, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's become increasingly difficult since education and healthcare plans were introduced for families to actually even get a plan, and they're having to often go to tribunals to fight to get a plan, which just isn't right. And we're, trying to support families where children do need plans. A lot of children with conditions like autism and ADHD are being excluded from schools and suspended from schools because they're struggling to cope without the support that they need. And we also find that a lot of children can mask their difficulties in schools. So they manage to go through the school day as a perfectly behaved pupil, but when they get home, everything falls apart. And when families are coming to the schools to say, our child has difficulties, a lot of families are not being believed, and because they're not accessing NHS assessments and support, the families are then having to go to independent organisations like ours to get assessments and support, and then having to get legal help as well to fight for the support that their children need. So we're concerned about the support for children with neurodiversity in schools.
And as well as that, when, of course, there are pupils who do manage to secure those education and healthcare plans and get access to the support they need, there is a shortage of the specialist capacity of skills within school staff to actually treat these pupils, aren't there?
Absolutely. And therapists, for example, in the NHS have very strict criteria for what types of difficulties they can help, and very often they are restricted to just doing occasional visits to a child to support maybe a child with significant physical difficulties like cerebral palsy, to help them with their seating or their feeding in school, whereas children who might be having behavioural difficulties, who might be on the autism spectrum, are unlikely to be really getting very much support. And we're also concerned that as a result of the lack of resources in the NHS, therapists are actually losing the hands-on skills because they're not having opportunities to give treatment to children. And that's of a great concern as well.
Absolutely, because if these children are not getting the support that they need, it can lead to a whole raft of new issues, can't it, such as social isolation and also mental health issues.
Absolutely, and it can be incredibly stressful for parents who then have to give up jobs, stay at home, and try and homeschool their child. So the children who are being excluded do feel very socially isolated, and their self-esteem can plummet, their motivation drop, and then really struggle academically from that point onwards, which will limit their opportunities in later life, and also can very quickly lead to very serious mental health conditions. So it's very important that children get help early. And I was really pleased to see recently about the Dutch Cambridge taking a step forward in looking at early intervention for very young children, because it's so key to have the help as soon as you can, and not just with young children, but if an adolescent child is presenting with symptoms of a mental health condition, the sooner they can get help, the less likely it is to lead to a more serious condition and to other difficulties with their lives and their futures. So, getting the help early is so important.
It is hugely important, and for those who do need to be helped quite early on because they didn't necessarily get the best start in life, we've talked already about how functional medicine could work really well at this time. Could that potentially be a solution that could be brought in for those people too?
Yes, absolutely. Post-adoption support does fund multidisciplinary assessments for children where a paediatrician, occupational therapist and speech and language therapist and psychologists may be involved, and it will fund certain kinds of therapies for children who've been adopted or who are looked after. But functional medicine is not something that's considered to be eligible for funding. And children who don't get the best start in life may have experienced trauma, neglect, exposure to drugs and alcohol, and poor nutrition, both when they're in the womb and when they're born, which can lead to chronic physical and mental health conditions And functional medicine can promote optimal functioning and protect their health and well-being, improving their opportunities later in life. So adverse childhood experiences has been found through research to increase risk factors for long-term problems for future life. So we feel very strongly and passionately that children who don't have a good start in life need to have this approach funded so that they can optimise their future and lead happy, healthy lives as much as possible. And I think there is a lack of understanding of how this early kind of trauma and neglect and nutritional deficiency can affect behaviour and development. And there will be more research which will come out over time, but we really need to be talking about this change now.
And I think now is as good a time as any, this time that we're taking to sit back and reflect while all this is going on. And it all seems to boil down to one thing, making sure that these children who haven't had best starts in life, who may be suffering from neurodiversity needs, it's all about making sure that their prospects in life do not suffer, isn't it, in the long run? That's the whole purpose of making sure that they get this support quickly that they need.
Absolutely it is. And I think, we see a lot of children who come to us who may not meet the criteria for a diagnosis. They may just be struggling in some part of their life and need some support. And really to just keep a child feeling good about themselves, their self-esteem and their health and well-being can just transform their outlook on life and their future. And just to say, it's so important that the way we work with the children and young people is enjoyable and fun, and that we're empowering them and inspiring them and their families, and helping them to take responsibility for their own health rather than feeling they need to go and be given this, that or the other. We're really hoping that people will feel empowered, and all the children who come to see us have their own superpowers. And we like to help them acknowledge, and those around them acknowledge, their superpowers, so they can really build on those and build their self-esteem.
And I think it is wonderful that you're looking to expand that offering in that way there, Jo. And if we think about the Parliamentary Review article that you wrote that was published in January this year, just for those who haven't read it, I understand that you were looking to launch a charity this year, stareyes.org, which was geared toward offering support to families who can't afford private services. With the whole situation at the moment, is that still panning out quite well, or has that very much sort of been put on hold for the minute?
Well, I'm sad to say that with the lockdown and the current climate that we're in, we've had to put that on hold. We're aware that so many charities who are already really well established are struggling, and it's obviously not the right time to be setting up a charity. We've got some parents who've worked with us who have been volunteering and helping us to do the groundwork for setting up the charity Starjumpz, which we planned to launch this year, but we've had to put that on hold for now.
It's a shame to hear that, but hopefully, of course, it is something that can be picked up again once we start to see the fog clear, as it were, with everything going on and restrictions starting to be eased.
Yes, absolutely. We've had that plan for years now, so a few weeks of this isn't going to put it off our agenda.
That's really, really good to hear, Jo. And as well, I can imagine that in your line of work, in particular, there's so much to be inspired by, of course, by children, by other people working within the industry. Are there any examples of people who stick out that have really inspired you during your career and maybe even influenced your way of leadership within Starjumpz?
That's a good question. I haven't... There are so many people. I'm trying to think. So, I mean, in this country, I would say somebody who I feel is very inspirational at the moment and who is getting more and more well known is Rajan Chatterjee. I don't know if you know of him, who has written a book about, I think it's the 5 Pillars of Health, and he's on television quite a lot. After his son became very seriously ill and he discovered it was a nutritional deficiency, he's gone on to work in the functional medicine field, and he's really promoting looking at the root causes of health problems. So he's somebody I would say.
It's a really, really interesting example there. And I think it's important to remember when we think about leadership generally that sometimes as a society, we are quite tempted to think of good leaders as being people who are in the public eye, essentially celebrities, people who are maybe politicians, sports personalities, whereas leadership is about inspiring, isn't it?
It is completely about inspiring. And your comment there has prompted me to think of my father, who's a GP, retired now, but whose, passion for caring for his patients definitely inspired me from an early age. And actually the whole team I work with, I find my team, from our practice manager and our practice management staff to our therapists, to our doctors, they're all inspirational to me. And yes, I'm very proud and privileged to be working with such amazing people. Yes, and it can't be, as you say, it can be just anybody can be inspiring.
Absolutely. And people who are great leaders and do inspire, do you think that these people come with certain innate qualities, or do you think that you can actually learn how to become a good leader and an inspiration as you develop throughout your life and your career?
I think anybody can become a great leader. I think we all have greatness within us, incredible powers within us that we're often not able to recognize, because quite early on in life, children have start to develop limiting beliefs. A teacher may say, "Oh, that's not very good piece of work you've done," or, for example, I can remember my mum telling them their handwriting was spidery, and just a throwaway comment can really limit beliefs of people as they grow up. I thought I wasn't very academic at school, and I never really thought I was going to do anything in a very big leadership role, but I was very passionate about helping people, and I had a vision when I was very young of creating a children's castle. It was going to be then where we had a very holistic approach to supporting people. And I would say that one of the things that I do think that makes a difference in a lot of cases is where somebody's been through adversity, that can create incredible understanding of other people's difficulties, and also self-awareness. And it can be having some kind of a breakdown can lead to incredible breakthroughs. And a lot of the business leaders I know who are really inspiring, and other leaders, have been through some great adversity or a number of adversities, which I have experienced in my life, that I've learned to think of as kind of gifts along the way that have helped me in getting to where I am now, with the people I am with now, doing what I do now. And I think sometimes we can see adversity as something really terrible, but it can be an opportunity to grow. And this current time that we're in, I think it is an opportunity to grow and to change some things for the better.
Absolutely. And it's often said, isn't it, that times of difficulty and crisis do bring out the best in people. And I think as an experience, sort of being thrust out of your comfort zone can be hugely important in one's development, can't it? And really beneficial, in fact.
Absolutely, it can. It really can. And just on being inspired, I would like to just touch on, the children that we see and how inspirational they are. As a therapist who I do hands-on therapy with children, I find being with a child or a young person, it helps you to really be in the moment, which is so important, to be in the present, to be in the now. And just by following the lead of a child, it can really be incredibly grounding. There's probably other words I could use to describe it. But when you really focus on what a child is saying and what a child is doing, it can be so inspiring, and they can come out with the most beautiful, incredible ideas and reflections on things that are just awe-inspiring. So, yeah, I feel very fortunate to be working with children.
It's a really, really important point that you mentioned there, Jo, because you talked just a little bit earlier on about this sort of temptation to criticise, especially in this country. Whereas I think what we should be doing is encouraging people, especially from an early age, isn't it? Encouraging children perhaps to express themselves. And if they do make mistakes, embrace it. Don't be afraid of failure. Learn from it and just enjoy the experience.
Absolutely, because it's through mistakes that's how we learn. And just trying, it's just about trying, and it's just about enjoying what you're doing, and really by encouraging each other, child or adult, it's a really, really wonderful thing to do, being supportive. And yes, as you say, it's very easy to be critical at this time, and it can really be very damaging to be like that. So to be supportive and collaborative, encouraging, and that's a really good thing to be holding in mind right now.
For sure. And if, based upon your experience, Jo, you could offer some advice to the younger generations of emerging leaders who are out there, what might you tell them?
Oh, what would I tell them? I think what we were just saying before, believe in yourself, believe in the power within you that we all have. We all have incredible potential, and hold on to your dreams. Don't be put off by what other people say or what other people think. Hold on to your dreams and really go for them, because for me, I had a dream in my 20s of having something like Starjumpz. It took me a very long time for that dream to manifest, but I held on to it for many years, and it has. And so I think hold on to your dreams and go for them.
I think that is very sound advice, and it's something that everybody should be holding on to, especially now. I have to say, Jo, before we do wrap things up, if we do think about the future, do tell me what you think the next few months hold for yourself and for Starjumpz, and what you really hope to achieve, not only in navigating COVID-19, but also in emerging from the pandemic as well.
So I think the next few weeks and months are, like for everyone, very uncertain for us, and we're finding it quite hard without any idea of how we might exit lockdown. We can't really plan for the next phase of whatever the next phase might be. And I do understand why the government has to be cautious and cannot just change things, and it may be some time before we know that. We are working hard right now to do as much as we can online and to develop services and resources to support people for the future while we're not able to do so much direct therapy. We're, as we said, we're putting on hold some of our plans to open satellites and to launch charity. We are, on the positive side, seeing that the online resources and the video resources is a different way of extending our reach, which is positive. I think looking to the future, we want to collaborate and engage with other organisations like ourselves. One to mention is Embracing Diversity Charity, who are bringing together people who want to support those with very diverse neurodevelopmental conditions. And we want to work with other organisations and engage with policymakers to accelerate change. So by being part of the parliamentary review, we're hoping that we may be able to have a voice and be heard and to be able to help to accelerate change. I think we're, like all organisations, it's a very challenging time in terms of, not knowing how we're going to come out the other side of this and whether we're going to then face a bit of a mountain to climb in terms of whether we're where we are financially. But we're very hopeful that once the next few weeks are over and we're doing more online, that we'll be fine. And we've certainly been through, Starjumpz has been through a lot of challenges already over the years we've been going, and I know this isn't going to stop us, and we will bounce back. And I hope that everybody else who is struggling right now can also bounce back, and perhaps in a way where our lives are enriched by this time we've had to reflect on our health and well-being and to maybe make some changes to support all of us.
Absolutely, and let's hope we do start seeing those positive changes borne out sooner rather than later as we start to see the fog lifting. We are just about out of time, Joe, but it has been an absolute pleasure and also incredibly insightful having you on today's programme. And what I think would be fantastic for the listeners is to actually maybe have you back on in a few months' time to look at this retrospectively and just see how Starjumpz is doing and how things have played out and whether we're seeing those changes borne out as well. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with me and share your views today.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'd love to come back on, and I'd love to bring Dr. Georgie Siggers, who's in the review with me, and maybe some of the other members of the team. That would be fabulous. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
I think it would be wonderful to hear from both of you in the future. Thank you so much. That was Joanna Brett, CEO and owner of Starjumpz Children's Centre in Crowborough, East Sussex. I hope you all enjoyed my interview with Joanna and, of course, learning more about how the whole team at Starjumpz is continuing to raise standards even throughout this challenging time. Coming up next on the programme, I'll be handing over to Matthew O'Neill for his exclusive interview with Lord David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett is an active member of the House of Lords, a former Labour MP and Secretary of State, and, of course, the chairman of the Leaders' Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Despite being blind from birth, Lord Blunkett is one of the most prominent politicians of his generation, having held a number of senior positions in Tony Blair's cabinet and having served as the MP for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough for 28 years. Lord Blunkett was elevated to the House of Lords in August 2015, anointed Baron Blunkett of Brightside and Hillsborough. I hope you enjoyed listening just as much as Matthew enjoyed speaking with Lord Blunkett, and that's coming up next.
Lord Blunkett, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be with you.
Well, of course, nothing is being said at the moment other than COVID-19, which we must touch on. What would your message be to small businesses who are trying to keep going?
Well, I think the last ones standing will be the ones that thrive when we get back to some sort of normality. So it's have confidence and courage. Obviously take advantage as far as you can of the government help. I think that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has gone about as far as you could have expected in the circumstances. There are obviously small businesses that fall between the cracks. Those who don't have defined premises can't benefit from the business rate waiver, have not really been able to demonstrate that they can adhere to the PAYE for furloughing staff, and of course whether they can receive the grant, 10,000 or 25,000. All of those who can are obviously able at least to benefit from that for the time being and look to the future. But I think the second thing to say, and they don't need me to tell them this as a politician who did once do a business studies qualification, which is that it will be a different world, and being able to think about how that world will look in a year's time and be creative about it and learn from not just what's happening to you at this moment in time, but to others around you and the sector that you're working in, that will be really important.
Do you feel that the long-term effects of the COVID-19 outbreak will in some ways be positive for British industry?
Well, only in the sense that people are having to be creative, they're having to adjust and innovate. Therefore, they're thinking about more productive, if you like, greater productivity ways of delivering the same service or delivering the same products. And in that sense, I think we'll have temporarily at least very much higher unemployment than we've become used to, but we'll probably have a burst of productivity, which will help with the recovery. Whether it will help with the inequity of the way in which our economy is imbalanced, both between services and productivity and the production of goods and services, I'm not sure. What we will need to try and do is to ensure that the geographic imbalance that exists is, as far as humanly possible, is dealt with by both the entrepreneurship and innovation from the bottom up and targeted government help, which will still be needed. And we are now in the throes of the kind of borrowing that we saw back in 2008 to save the banking and economic system. We're having to do that to save the whole of our productive business and commerce, and I think that will have to be sustained for some time.
Do you feel that people will take a second look at global supply chains in the wake of this outbreak?
I think there's going to be much more creative ways of using local supply and linking up inside sectors much more effectively. And I hope that the Leaders' Council will be able to play a part in that, in the sense that people who have something in common, a synergy in terms of what they're delivering, whether it's a service or whether it's manufacturing or whatever, will be able to see that there's a good outcome from knowing the sector better, linking with people, not just geographically, locally, but those in this country who may not have been on the radar in terms of what they produced for the supply chain. And of course, ensuring, because there's quite a lot of fraud going on as we speak with people getting into cyber attacks, that they'll also take account of going into the cyber security side effectively as well. The more we are online, the more people who are working from home, the more vulnerable those businesses and their supply chain become. And that's something to think about as well.
How important is strong leadership at the moment?
Well, I actually think that it's brought to the fore leadership in a whole range of areas, from obviously government itself, and there's been ups and downs with the Prime Minister's severe illness, but all the way through the public and private sector, people have, to use the jargon, stepped up, and they've shown local, regional, national level the kind of leadership that Britain historically was very good at. Regrettably, we've not seen the same on the international scene for all kinds of reasons, but maybe we will in future. So I think out of this will come experience of people who have seen an opportunity to do good, as well as seen an opportunity to provide a good service or goods, including, for instance, shortages for the health and social care system, the food chain and the like. But also, I think in terms of seeing the synergy between the private and the voluntary sector and using people's commitment to each other in a very positive way. I'm not sentimental about this. Things will revert. But actually, I think there's a kind of moment of moral judgment of people feeling that they've got a role to play outside the immediate survival that they're engaged in. And if we can hang on to a little bit of that social responsibility, that will be a very positive outcome.
Absolutely. Now, what's your broad view of how the government is responding to this? Are you broadly supportive of their measures?
Well, it may surprise people to hear that I have been very supportive. Of course, there's been legitimate criticisms about the speed of response on protective equipment and on issues relating to testing. But my own view is very similar to the challenge that was made to the Prime Minister of Italy when people said, why didn't you close Italy down faster? And he said, a fortnight before we did it, I would have been considered to be a madman and nobody would have agreed to do it if I'd tried to move too quickly. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on here in the UK. We may have seen the signals elsewhere across the world and taken them more seriously at the time. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but as someone who's had his life in the opposite political party to the present government, I think that with some hiccups and mistakes, they've not done a bad job in what has been incredibly difficult circumstances.
And you're absolutely right. In a liberal democracy that we live in, it's very difficult for people to swallow orders given to them from government.
Well, the UK and the US, and to some extent the Scandinavian countries, have a very different history and therefore interest in maintaining the freedom to decide and the persuasion and consent that's required. Those countries that have experienced one way or another totalitarianism over the last century have a slightly different way of coming at this. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I think that that's why getting the balance right of getting people to go along with what you want them to do in their interests as well as the nation as a whole is a sensible, proportional balance. And I think we now need to adjust to the coming out of the crisis gradually, readjusting to recovery in the same way.
Now, something you've mentioned recently on this balance is the police overreach in the enforcement of the COVID-19 structures that have been put in place. What have they done right, and where have they gone too far?
Well, I think that they were interpreting what was not necessarily as clear advice as it might have been for all kinds of reasons, because people were feeling their way. I think what's come out of it has been a demonstration by local police services in some parts of the country that they could get people to do what was needed without the heavy hand of drones overhead or people being told that they shouldn't be walking in the street, because this was all about self-isolation, not incarceration. It was about getting people not to pass the infection on to each other and therefore to provide distance rather than to make our lives a misery. Those police services that adopted that policing by consent and chivying people along did really well. Those who went over the top, I think, soon got a very substantial pushback. And one of the strengths of our democracy is that you could have that debate. People could say, I'm terribly sorry, we think the police force in our area has gone over the top. And that in itself is a constraint and a readjustment. That's another strength of living in a country where you can have opinions and express them without actually being thought to be a fool.
Now, of course, the government has faced criticism that they were slow to react, and Boris Johnson wasn't present at the early COVID-19 COBRA meetings. Now, Number 10 has claimed that this is normal practice. The health secretary often chairs COBRA meetings related to health. Does this tally with your experience as a Secretary of State, or would you have expected the PM to be more hands-on during the initial stages?
I think different prime ministers do have a very different style. And Boris's style, which I think will now be considerably adjusted, was very swashbuckling. In some senses, delegating is a good thing, as every leader of every business or public service knows. Those who try to pull too much into themselves end up with a massive bottleneck, great failure of trust, and the inability of people to show what they're worth and to demonstrate their capability. So I'd be very wary of jumping in and saying he was wrong to delegate the essential COBRA meetings. What I was surprised about was that he didn't chair the first couple, because my experience with Tony Blair for the 8 years I was in cabinet was that Tony was a great delegator, but he would get a grip to begin with, watch what the difficulties were, and then give people direction and confidence to be able to get on with it. So looking back, I think Boris himself probably thinks, God, I wish I'd spotted the signals from elsewhere in the world more rapidly, and I'd just been there. However, this also raises another issue. All of us in positions of leadership need good teams around us. I think after this is over, he will be assessing those who really did step up and those who demonstrated their inadequacy. I think we'll probably end up in a year's time with a much stronger cabinet than we have today.
Well, absolutely. And of course, we've seen a significant drop in the visibility of certain special advisors like Dominic Cummings during this entire period. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out.
It's certainly readjusted the role of those behind the scenes with those who should be taking the decisions, having received advice. Obviously, there's been a complete transformation in the profile of experts, if I might use that term, who'd previously been denigrated. Scientists, medics, people with behavioral science understanding. My only criticism was, were we getting wide enough advice? Were we narrowing it too much to a couple of key centres in London? But that's because I've always been adverse to everything being London-centric. I think there's great expertise, wisdom, experience out in the sticks, and we should use it.
Rightly so. Now, was pandemic planning part of your time as a minister, particularly perhaps when you were Home Secretary?
Well, it was, but it was on the back of risk arising out of counter-terrorism measures.
Right.
I was the Home Secretary for 3 months when the attack took place in September 2001 on the World Trade Center and beyond. We did an enormous amount of scenario planning, both desktop and real. On the back of that, it was very heavily orientated to future developing terrorism risk. I certainly got involved with talking about pandemics. I remember being at a seminar in Edinburgh where the university there had done a lot of work itself on the issue of pandemics. And of course, we saw SARS and other things emerging. I think people have criticized the government for not picking up the report from 2015, 5 years ago. I think that what happens is human nature kicks in. You deal with what you're immediately faced with. You can sponsor reports, and this is true of business planning, of course, as well, and scenario planning for what business continuity will look like, recovery plans for business, what will happen if there's a cyber attack, what happens if there's an energy shutdown. These kind of things you can look at, but you're immediately turning your eyes to what's in front of you. And had we picked up a bit more on the danger from Ebola and SARS and what have you in the past, then we might have said, what if something hits us in the developed nations that we don't have a vaccine for, that we can't immediately whisk up protective materials or equipment, or for that matter, medicines that help with recovery, all of which we now see are a danger. I think this will make an enormous difference to the planning for the years ahead. I hope it will be widened so that we don't just look at what's happened, but very rarely do you see something exactly repeat itself. Some of the circumstances will be, but others won't. So that's why I've put emphasis in what I talk about on looking at the other virus, the cyber attack scenario, which could be just as dangerous in a world of just-in-time provision. One of the miracles of the modern developed world, except for the very poor, has been the distribution of food. A lot of it on computerized, technologically advanced systems. If that were to come down, we'd be in real trouble. So I think we need to think those sort of scenarios as well.
So have a full plan across both sectors, biological warfare, pandemics, and cyber warfare.
Yes, and to do so on different levels. I think, again, thinking global but acting local, we need a lot more to think about what would happen if something took shape that actually broke down those national and global chains and how we would cope. And without, obviously, we've got enough fear and anxiety to last a lifetime. Without creating even more anxiety, we can think about those things for the future in a more rational way, I think.
Now, aside from the physical threat of the virus, one of the things that people are vastly worried about is the effect on the economy, not just national economy, but also the world economy. Now, it has been said by certain parties, and I'd like to garner your thoughts on this. Is there a danger of the effects of the lockdown being even worse than those of the virus?
Were it be prolonged, I fear that balance would tip the other way. It is about proportionality. It is about balance. It's the wisdom of Solomon, really, to get the moment right when you start to move and then to move quickly. There's no doubt whatsoever that we are stocking up, not just on the economic and employment front, which will be devastating enough, but on the health and social well-being front, enormous challenges, and they will need careful handling because there's a lot of people whose lives, for a variety of reasons, are at risk in the future on a scale that we've been dealing with over the immediate handling of the pandemic, concentrating really hard on those affected by COVID-19, those sadly who have died or been seriously incapacitated. That will roll over into the economic, the social, the mental health and cultural well-being of the nation, and that will need all of us to pull together as well.
Absolutely. Now, do you believe the government's doing enough for business?
I think that the speed of reaction once the scale of the pandemic was clear was very good. I've praised Rishi Sunak for his action. Remember, a chancellor who only just come into office was planning to deliver the budget in the middle of March and has had at least three equivalent budgets since. I think he's handled it very well. Understandably worried now about what we're doing to our economy. The level of borrowing is sustainable because of low interest rates, but it reaches a point, of course, where it tips over so that you can't then do the kind of structural investment requirements that the government were laying out before and in the March budget. And those will have their consequences as well as a planned payback over many years. I think we've learned something over the last few months. We needed to take immediate action. We don't want another round of austerity equivalent from 2010 through to 2019. I don't think the nation, on the back of what's happened and the challenges we have, could take that. And therefore, we need a different plan, economic plan, over a much longer period, just as we did from the Second World War all the way through to 2002, when the final American loans were paid off.
Now, of course, one thing that's on everyone's lips, how much longer do you believe that the lockdown can go on for?
I believe that we need to be substantially back in action as an economy in June. This obviously is led in terms of places where people would meet in large numbers, having to adjust to the fact that it will be longer for them. And sadly, that will involve business closures. It's why the Chancellor extended the furlough scheme to the end of June. Mm-hmm. But unless we get things moving in June, I think we'll run into the summer where all kinds of services and industries will have a chain reaction effect, and what happens with one will then have a major impact on another. And then you get the skittle effect, where things get knocked down that you hadn't perceived were going to be affected. So I very much, if I were in government, and I always think of things in that context, what would I do if I were in government? I would be on the side from the second week in May, on the side of the hawks, in terms of saying we've got to start moving, and we've got to do so with the collaboration and cooperation of the public, who have got the message, who did behave, who responded magnificently. Let's try and get back, perhaps, doing things differently for a time, but substantially getting back to business as usual. And unless we do that, then those areas that can't and wouldn't expect to be back in action immediately get pushed further into the middle of the year and the autumn, and then they become unsustainable.
Now, of course, one of the other major developments we've had recently are the changes in the Labour Party. So if we could just speak on the Labour Party for a while. This might sound like an obvious question, but how does Secure differ from Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I'm biased because I believe the Labour Party has come out of 4.5 years of a black hole of a nightmare, where it neither represented a credible opposition nor an electable government, and the combination was to let those who supported the Labour Party and needed some of its policies let them down very badly. Sir Keir Starmer both is a highly intelligent, professional lawyer who, as Director of Public Prosecutions, led the service well, had to take difficult decisions at a time of austerity, understands the world beyond Labour members, but has been able to do business with those who originally supported Jeremy Corbyn and was able to command support from them. His creation of a balanced shadow ministerial team has been very encouraging. I supported Lisa Nandy, who he's made Shadow Foreign Secretary, because I thought she understood the north of England and the disaffected former Labour voters. But I believe that Sir Keir has taken on board those who have something really sensible to offer, and I believe he will be both a great leader of the opposition. More importantly, he will then present himself as a credible alternative Prime Minister. And all governments need an alternative government at their shoulder. It was true of us from 97, and it took the Conservatives some time to recover and to get to that position, but they did, and the Labour Party will, and that's crucial for our democracy. All of us need to understand and appreciate that a living, breathing, functioning democracy requires a credible, confident, and in many ways supportable opposition, as well as a government that we clearly want to do well, because none of us want, as we didn't with the COVID crisis, none of us want the government to fail. We want to see our economy recover. We want our social well-being to be taken into account. We want to overcome deep-seated inequality and poverty, and we want to do it with enterprise and entrepreneurship and business playing their role. And that is about leadership nationally, locally, in the private and the public sector, people with ideas, with confidence, with the ability to pull teams around them, above all, to have some idea of what it is they want to achieve and a very good idea as to how to achieve it.
Now, of course, one of the biggest problems Secure is facing will be tackling the party's anti-Semitism problem. There has been a recent internal report that has been quite damning. What's your response to that report, and what does Secure need to do in response?
Well, there are two reports. One which is being produced by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which he will, and has already indicated, will implement in full. The second was a leaked report put together by the supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, 800 pages of private interchanges on social media which he has, Keir Starmer, set up an investigation to identify who did it, who leaked it, what the content was, does it have any salience and lessons for us, and where necessary, action will be taken. So I hope that as he moved very quickly to reassure the Jewish community, so he will be able to take the necessary steps to back up that reassurance with the kind of actions that says that this was a blight on a historic great political party that all of us were ashamed of. We've been able to put that behind us and to move on to facing the future with confidence.
What's the one key thing that Sir Keir needs to do to restore Labour as an election-winning party?
I think Sir Keir Starmer's major challenge is to convince sceptical voters that Labour has not only reverted to a party that they can support because they can see it acting, developing, presenting as a credible alternative government, but also that the lessons have been learned from the fiasco from 2015 onwards. In other words, there have to be very clear signals of substantial change, not just the right words, not just reassurance that we're not going back to some of the crazier policies, but actually that we've understood why the electorate rejected those policies so substantially in December 2019. If people get that message, they'll understand that the Labour Party has changed, as it did in the 1980s and early 90s, to become the electable government with the greatest majority in historic majority, even greater than 1945, which I was privileged to be able to take advantage of in 1997 when I joined the cabinet.
Now, I know what your answer is going to be to this question, but indulge me. Do you think Sir Keir has what it takes to be PM?
Yes, I do. I think he has the background, he has the experience, he has the professionalism, he has the forensic mindset, and he has the confidence to have put a team around him which will ensure that it will work. And those elements are true of all leaders. Ideas, the ability to build a team, to have confidence in that team, and to be able to demonstrate leadership in practice, sometimes at the most difficult times. And, you know, the Leaders' Council, those sharing their thoughts with the kind of thing that we're doing now with a podcast, but also joining us in linking up in that network of people who can support and help each other and learn from each other. That is what needs to be done in politics as it needs to be done in business. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew.
Well, thank you for coming on the program. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much, and good luck to all those listening in what has been a nightmare scenario. Good luck for the future. Have courage, have confidence, and yes, listen to those who know more about business than I ever will.
Thank you, Lord Blunkett.
Thank you.
As always, it has been a pleasure both listening to and learning from our guests. I and Matthew O'Neill hope you all enjoyed listening, and until next time, since sadly all of the pubs are still closed, Matthew and I will be sitting in our respective front rooms with a bottle of Merlot and raising a glass to raising standards. Hopefully we can reoccupy our usual corner in the Westminster Arms soon. Remember, look after yourselves, stay at home, and save lives. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.